It was early in the 1800s that Americans were lured to a new way of life in an untamed frontier region of Mexico called Texas. Thousands of settlers would stream into this foreign land hoping to spread their heritage and their culture. But the true story of this land is of two men who swept through history in a Texas-sized legend of incredible battles and tremendous enterprise. Stephen Austin and Sam Houston would lead the Texans in their struggle for prosperity, independence, and statehood. As a new state was formed, so was the legend of two men, the fathers of Texas.
I have been accused of having magnificent schemes for Texas, and I confess that I have had them. It is depopulated. I wish to people it. The population that is there is backward. I wish it to be advanced by the introduction of industrious farmers and liberal Republicans. I want the savage Indians subdued, the frontier protected, the lands cultivated. I wish to take from my native land and from every other country the best that they have and transplant it in my adopted land. Stephen F. Austin.
If one were to look at Stephen F. Austin, the sight that they see is not all that impressive. He's frail, but with penetrating brown eyes, a mop of hair that seems to go in all directions, but there is an intensity about the man, a seemingly inexhaustible drive and energy.
Born in Virginia in 1793, Stephen grew up in a prosperous Missouri household headed by his father, Moses Austin. The family fortune had been made in the business of lead mining.
As a boy, his father sent him to the Northeast, to Connecticut, to attend a boys' boarding school. And later on, as a little bit older teenager, he was sent to Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky, where he received a very polished classical education.
Stephen F. Austin comes from a painfully proper New England family. His father, Moses, is fairly well-to-do, but while Stephen is still a young man, his father loses his fortune. And Stephen is aware that the family is facing financial problems.
Moses Austin, as always in his life, undertook this mining project on a grand scale, gambling everything that the family had. By 1820, Moses Austin and the entire family were so far in debt that they would never recover. And Moses hit upon a daring plan. The idea was to travel into Spanish Texas, armed with what he thought was a still viable Spanish citizenship left over from his days as a lead miner in Spanish Louisiana, and apply to the Mexican government in San Antonio for permission to import 300 American families and settle them on a land grant in Texas.
It was both a daring and desperate plan. If successful, it would have a profound effect on the lives of thousands of future pioneers, as well as another native Virginian, Sam Houston.
Houston was born on March 2nd, 1793 in Rockbridge County, Virginia. His father was named Samuel Houston, and his mother was Elizabeth Paxton. They are both Scotch-Irish stock, the same stock that Andrew Jackson, John C. Calhoun came from.
By 1806, Sam's father had died, and on a clear spring morning in 1808, young Sam left their Virginia plantation by covered wagon with his mother and 8 brothers and sisters, bound for Tennessee.
Houston was the favorite of the children, this middle child, and so he drove this wagon, actually, and sat with his mother on the buckboard of this wagon, and she relied on him for many things, since the father was dead. But he had, even though he had older brothers, she relied on Sam in other ways. And so she was the first one to really teach him.
His education came mostly from reading the books in his father's library. And when he discovered the Iliad, discovered stories of battle and romance and heroism, and he memorized huge passages from Homer. And maybe this had something to do with making him want to lead a life of romantic adventure also.
Sam Houston's adventurous childhood spirit would grow with him as he matured into a wayward young man in Tennessee.
The best indication of Houston's rebellious attitude came when the family told him to go to work in a store they had in Maryville. He was indifferent, shall we say, to farm work, and his brothers weren't happy about that. So they tried to put him to work in a family store, and he just simply ran away and went to live with the Cherokees.
He was living about 90 miles south of this farmstead in East Tennessee on an island in the Hiwassee River with a band of 300 Cherokee Indians led by a man named Ulatika, who adopted Sam and took him into his lodge and gave him the famous name Kalanu, the Raven. And he was all of 16 years old.
Nicknamed the Raven, Sam Houston would don the costume of his adopted Cherokee family and remove himself to the world of his classical heroes.
The family, a couple of the sons, went to get him, and as the story goes, they found him resting under a tree, reading the Iliad, and he told them that he preferred measuring deer tracks in the wilderness to measuring calico in a store.
It was the molding period of life, wandering along the banks of streams side by side with some Indian maiden, when the heart, just charmed into the feverish hopes and dreams of youth, looks wistfully around on all things for light and beauty. Sam Houston.
Houston left the Indians after 3 years because he was broke. He had gone to town, bought presents for his Indian friends, and bought them on credit and gone into debt.
With no qualifications, Sam became a school teacher until the War of 1812 called him to adventure.
In 1813, the war was going on. He had finished this 1 year of school teaching, paid his debts. Army recruiters came through Knoxville, and Houston volunteered.
Houston would serve under General Andrew Jackson at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend.
Houston tried to lead a charge, got right in front of it, and was hit by 2 rifle balls in the shoulder and upper arm. Managed to crawl out of the ravine and survived these wounds. Jackson appreciated the tremendous bravery that Houston showed. That's when they became acquainted, and eventually Houston served on Jackson's staff after the war and became almost a son to him.
With help from his mentor, Andrew Jackson, Sam Houston would enter politics as governor of Tennessee and enter the hearts of Americans as a showman.
In many ways, Houston was one of the first modern politicians in that he understood the value of a public image, and he understood how to work the media. And so we get portraits of Houston dressed in a Roman toga as Marius among the ruins. We get Houston dressed in various stages of Indian garb with blankets and Indian hunting shirts and the like. And Houston loved to be flamboyant. He knew that an audience loved a flamboyant leader. And there was no one in the West or in American politics more flamboyant than Houston.
On an autumn evening in the Cumberland woods of Tennessee, a passionate Sam Houston courted a yellow-haired girl named Eliza Allen. Houston would take her as his bride.
But within weeks, the marriage collapsed. He sent her packing back to her father, and he resigned as governor of Tennessee. This personal tragedy had great political repercussions. It ended his opportunity for a traditional political career and set him on a westward course that took him to Texas and the beginnings of the creation of an empire.
I was in agony and despair, and strongly tempted to end my worthless life. At that moment, however, an eagle swooped down near my head, and then soaring aloft with wildest screams, was lost in the rays of the setting sun. I knew then that a great destiny waited for me in the West. Sam Houston.
Fathers of Texas will continue in a moment here on A&E. Into Fathers of Texas.
In 1820, the object of Moses Austin's desire occupied an expansive 360,000 square miles of northern Mexican territory and was called Tejas by a token population of just 3,500 brave souls. Most were ranchers and farmers clustered in villages near the original Spanish missions of Goliad, Gonzales, and San Antonio de Bexar, the Alamo.
After securing permission from the Spanish authorities to bring in 300 families to Texas, Moses Austin traveled back to the United States, but he had problems on the way. By the time he arrived back in Louisiana, he had fallen severely ill from bad food and water and exposure, and he only lived a few more weeks upon arriving back in the United States.
When his father, on his deathbed, asked Stephen to take over his Texas enterprise, although this isn't really something Stephen has planned to do, it isn't even really something that Stephen is interested in. It never occurs to him to let down his father. It never occurs to him to not do something that might help the family financially, so he takes up his father's mantle and comes to Texas.
All the timber and underbrush of a tropical climate, cedar, cypress, and the like, rival one another in rank growth. From among them is wafted the fragrance of the blossoms of the magnificent magnolia, which I have seen nowhere in such splendor and profusion. Gustav Dressel, German immigrant.
In 1821, when Stephen F. Austin rode into Texas for the first time, he would have entered across the Louisiana frontier, come into Nacogdoches first in the piney woods of East Texas, and there found a very polyglot population of Frenchmen, some Hispanics, some Americans, a mixture of people living on the edges of Louisiana. And that's a place his father would have encountered too.
Stephen Austin, when he came to Texas, he came as an impresario. The term impresario was one which the Mexican government used based on the Spanish culture, and it was one in which a man was expected to bring the colonists, pay for their way, to establish the town, to be the government, to establish the land grants for the individual settlers, and this is one of the things that Stephen Austin was required to do.
Austin's charter from the Mexican government gave him the right to settle 300 families in his grant. He already had 100 who were interested before he ever went to Mexico. And through advertisements in Western newspapers, he soon had many more. And it wasn't long before his grant was fulfilled. And 300 families, the old 300 they were called, soon settled in Austin's colony. These became the founding families of Anglo Texas.